So here's a question that bugs a lot of Elder Scrolls players. You walk into a temple in Skyrim, you pray at a shrine, and boom, you get a blessing. Maybe your magicka regenerates faster. Maybe you're better at blocking with your shield. Cool, right? But then you hear the lore nerds talking about how the Aedra are the dead gods, and you're like, wait, hold on. How can a dead god give me a magic boost? This is one of those things that Elder Scrolls does, where it drops this huge lore bomb on you and then just walks away like nothing happened. The game mechanics say one thing, the lore says another, and you're stuck in the middle trying to figure out what's actually going on. Before we can answer whether the Aedra are dead, we need to talk about what they even are. And to do that, we gotta go way back, like before the world existed back. In the beginning, there were these two forces called Anu and Padomai. Think of them like order and chaos, light and dark, stability and change. From their interaction, a bunch of spirits were born. These spirits are called the Etada, which basically means original spirits. They're the first beings in the Elder Scrolls universe. Now, one of these Etada was a guy named Lorkhan. Different cultures call him different names. The Nords call him Shor, the Imperials call him Shazar, and so on. But whatever you call him, this dude had an idea. He wanted to create the mortal world, the plane of Mundus, the planet Nirn, everything we walk around on in the games. Here's where it gets messy. Lorkhan goes around to all these other Etada and he's like, hey, let's make this cool world where mortals can exist. Depending on who you ask, he either convinced them or tricked them. The elves think he tricked them. Humans think he was a visionary. Either way, a bunch of these spirits agreed to help. But there was a catch. To create this world, these spirits had to give up their power, like a huge chunk of it. Some of them gave up everything. The spirits who participated in creating Mundus and gave up their power became known as the Aedra. The word Aedra is Elvish and it translates to our ancestors, because the elves literally descended from some of these beings. The spirits who refused to participate, who kept their power and didn't want anything to do with creating Mundus, became the Daedra. That word means not our ancestors. See, the elves were pretty salty about the whole creation thing because they lost their immortality and their divine power. So they distinguish between the Aedra, who created the world, and the Daedra, who didn't. Now let's talk about what happened to the Aedra after creation. This is where things get complicated and where the whole dead gods thing comes in. When the Aedra realized what creating Mundus actually cost them, they freaked out. Some of them, like Magnus, who's known as the god of magic, noped out of there before it was finished. Magnus tore a hole in reality as he left, and that hole became the sun. The stars, those are the holes left by his followers, the Magnage, who also bailed. But most of the Aedra stuck around and finished the job. The problem is, finishing the job meant sacrificing themselves in different ways. Some of them became what's called the Earth Bones. These are the laws of nature itself. They literally became the rules that govern reality. Gravity, time, the cycle of life and death, all of that. They gave up their consciousness and their physical forms to become the underlying structure of the universe. Others became the Elnofey, the ancestors who walked Nirn and eventually became the different races of men and Mer. They gave up their divinity to become mortal. The 8 divines, the main gods that most humans worship, are somewhere in between. They gave up so much power creating Mundus that they can't really exist in physical form anymore, but they're not completely gone either. They retreated to Aetherius, which is basically the divine realm, the source of magic and creation. So when people say the Aedra are dead, what they mean is that they're not active, conscious beings walking around like the Daedric princes are. The Daedra kept their power, so they can manifest, they can talk to you, they can give you quests, they can mess with mortals directly. The Aedra can't do that anymore. They're either unconscious, dormant, or they literally are the world itself. One of the best descriptions of the Aedra state comes from a character in Elder Scrolls Online named Lyranth. She's a Dremora, which means she serves the Daedra, but she gives a pretty clear explanation. She says the Aedra are as close to death as they can get. They still have enough power to keep their immortality and give mortals boons or blessings, but they're too weak to actually do anything major. They used to walk Nirn after it was created, but over time they went into what she describes as a kind of coma. Another source, Vivek from Morrowind, describes what it's like to be a god. He says it's like being asleep and awake at the same time. When he's awake, he's present, thinking and talking like normal. When he's asleep, he's very busy doing god stuff. For the completely immortal gods, like the Daedra, it's probably only like being asleep, existing outside of time. The Aedra might be stuck in that sleeping state, unable to wake up, but still conscious on some level. Now here's the really interesting part. Lorcan, the guy who started this whole mess, actually died, like properly died. After creation was finished, the other Aedra were pissed at him. They blamed him for tricking them or convincing them to give up their power. So Auriel, who the elves worship as the chief of the gods, and Trinimuk, this warrior spirit, they ripped Lorcan's heart right out of his chest. They tried to destroy the heart, but it wouldn't die. It literally laughed at them, because the heart had become the heart of the world itself. It was tied to Mundus so deeply that destroying it would mean destroying the world. So Auriel shot it with an arrow and launched it into the sea. The heart landed in what would become Red Mountain in Morrowind. That heart became super important later. The Dwemer found it and tried to use it to create a god of their own, a giant brass robot called Numidium. Something went wrong and the entire Dwemer race disappeared. Then, the Tribunal, those three living gods from Morrowind, they used the heart to achieve their divinity. They weren't born gods, they used tools to tap into Lorcan's heart and became gods that way. Later, Dagoth-Ur did the same thing. In Morrowind, you actually go and sever the enchantments on the heart, freeing it from mortal manipulation. People debate whether the heart was destroyed or if it just became untouchable again. Either way, Lorcan's consciousness lives on through what are called Shezarines. These are mortal incarnations of Lorcan that pop up throughout history. Pelinal Whitestrake was probably one. Some people think the player character in Skyrim might be one. So the Aedra exist in this weird state between life and death. They're not dead like a mortal is dead. They're not gone. But they're not active and aware like the Daedra either. Think of them like a person in a coma who's still dreaming. Their consciousness exists, but they can't interact with the world directly. Different sources describe it differently. Some say they're sleeping. Some say they're bound to the earth bones and can't move. Some say they're in Aetherius, watching everything but unable to intervene. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and it probably varies from Aedra to Aedra. Okay, so if the Aedra are mostly asleep or trapped or whatever, how do shrine blessings work? How do they grant prayers? How did Martin Septim turn into a giant dragon made of Akatosh at the end of Oblivion? First, let's talk about the shrines. Throughout the Elder Scrolls games, you can walk up to a shrine, pray to one of the divines, and get a temporary blessing. In Skyrim, these last for 8 real-time hours. You might get extra magicka, extra stamina, faster regeneration, whatever fits that god's sphere of influence. From a lore perspective, these blessings are probably automated. The Aedra set up these shrines back when they were more active, and the shrines themselves are imbued with divine energy. When you pray, you're not actually talking directly to Akatosh or Mara. You're interacting with the divine essence they left behind in that shrine. It's like a pre-recorded blessing that activates when someone sincere prays there. Think of it like this. Imagine you set up a bunch of care packages before you went into a coma. Anyone who comes by and asks for help gets one. You're not conscious enough to hand it to them yourself, but your prior setup makes sure they get what they need. That's basically what's happening with shrine blessings. But sometimes the Aedra do more than that, and that's where it gets interesting. In Oblivion, at the climax of the game, Martin Septim destroys the Amulet of Kings and transforms into an avatar of Akatosh. This isn't just a blessing. This is Akatosh himself manifesting through Martin to fight Mehrunes Dagon. Martin turns into a massive dragon made of fire and holy light, and he banishes Dagon back to oblivion. The question is, did Martin become Akatosh, or did Akatosh possess Martin? Some people think Martin mantled Akatosh, which in Elder Scrolls lore means he became Akatosh through a process of imitation and transformation. Others think Akatosh just channeled his power through Martin's body. Either way, this proves the Aedra can act when it really matters. The Amulet of Kings is key here. It was created through a covenant between Saint Alessia and Akatosh. Alessia's blood was joined with Akatosh's blood, creating a mystical connection. The amulet contained Akatosh's divine essence. When Martin shattered it, he released that essence and used his dragonborn heritage to channel it. This shows that the Aedra can intervene in extreme circumstances, especially when the right conditions are met. Martin had dragonborn blood. He had the Amulet of Kings. He was in the Temple of the One, a place specifically built to honor Akatosh. All of that together created a situation where Akatosh could manifest. In Elder Scrolls Online, there's another example. The Vestige, that's you, the player, gets imbued with the power of the 8 divines through the Amulet of Kings. This happens during the fight with Molag Bal at the end of the main quest. One of your companions sacrifices themselves in a ritual, and their soul is used to channel the combined power of all 8 Aedra into you. With that power, you become temporarily divine. You glow with golden light, you can fight a Daedric prince in his own realm, and you literally cut Molag Bal in half. This isn't just a blessing. This is the full might of the Aedra channeled through a mortal vessel. Again, this required specific conditions. It required the Amulet of Kings, which was imbued with the covenant between Alessia and Akatosh. It required a ritual performed by Abner Darn, a powerful sorcerer. It required a soul sacrifice. The Aedra couldn't just do this on their own. They needed mortals to set up the right conditions. So, the Aedra can grant blessings through shrines. They can manifest through avatars when the stars align, but they can't just appear and start talking to you like Sheogorath or Hermaeus Mora can. They need intermediaries. They need specific rituals. They need the right bloodlines and artifacts. Over the years, as more Elder Scrolls games have come out, our understanding of the Aedra has evolved. Each game adds new layers and sometimes contradicts what we thought we knew. In Arena and Daggerfall, the early games, the divines were just kind of there in the background. You could get blessings, but there wasn't much lore about what they actually were or how they worked. Morrowind started to flesh things out. This is where we got a lot of the deep lore about creation, about the Etada, about the difference between Aedra and Daedra. Morrowind also gave us the Tribunal, living gods who achieved divinity through the heart of Lorkhan. This showed that godhood in Elder Scrolls isn't just about being born divine, it's about power and how you use it. Oblivion gave us the most direct interaction with an Aedra through Martin's transformation into Akatosh's avatar. This proved the Aedra could still act, even if it cost Martin his life. It also introduced the idea that the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion could be sustained by Aedric power through the Amulet of Kings. Skyrim brought back the focus on Aedric worship with all the temples and shrines scattered around. It also introduced the dragonborn aspect of Akatosh. You, the player, are blessed by Akatosh with the ability to absorb dragon souls and use the tomb. This is Aedric, power flowing through a mortal bloodline. Elder Scrolls Online expanded things even further. In ESO, which is set in the Second Era, the Aedra are portrayed as slightly more active than in later eras. You get quests involving their worship, you see their influence more directly. The Vestige's transformation using the Divine's power shows they can still make moves when necessary. There's also the question of how the Aedra's power has changed over time. Some sources suggest they're getting weaker. The idea is that Nirn continues to drain their magic. It's not a one-time sacrifice. The world keeps pulling power from them, slowly draining them more and more. That's why they used to walk Nirn right after creation, but now they can't. That's why direct manifestations, like Martin becoming Akatosh's avatar, are so rare. But other sources suggest they're not getting weaker, they're just choosing not to interfere. Interfering with Mundus became off-limits after the Age of Myths ended. The Aedra decided mortals needed to find their own path, so they withdrew. Direct intervention became forbidden, except in the most extreme circumstances. Then there's the theory that what mortals worship shapes the Aedra. In the first era, there was something called the Alessian doctrines. The imperial cult tried to strip all the elven influences from Akatosh and turn him into a purely human god. This caused the first dragon break, a moment where time itself shattered because they were fundamentally changing the nature of an Aedra. This suggests the Aedra aren't fixed entities. They're influenced by mortal belief. The more people worship Akatosh as the dragon god of time, the more he embodies that. The more Nords worship Kine as a warrior goddess, the more that aspect of her becomes real. The Aedra are shaped by their worshippers, which means they're not entirely dormant. They're responsive, just in a passive way. Now, let's talk about how this compares to the Daedra, because the contrast is important. The Daedra refused to create Mundus. They didn't sacrifice their power. That means they're still fully conscious, fully active, and fully able to screw with mortals whenever they want. You meet Daedric princes throughout the games. They talk to you, they give you quests, they offer you artifacts in exchange for doing their bidding. The Daedra can manifest in Mundus way more easily than the Aedra can. Meiruna's Dagon straight up appears in the Imperial City at the end of Oblivion. Sheogorath has a whole realm you can visit in the Shivering Isles expansion. Hermaeus Mora talks to you constantly in the Dragonborn DLC. The Aedra can't do any of that. When Akatosh manifests through Marten, it's a one-time thing that requires destroying an incredibly powerful artifact and costs Marten his life. When the Divines empower the Vestige in Iso, it requires a soul sacrifice and only lasts for one fight. The Daedra are active gods. The Aedra are passive gods. That's the big difference. The Daedra can choose to help or hurt you on a whim. The Aedra can only help you if you meet very specific conditions. But here's the thing. The Aedra's weakness is also their strength. Because they sacrifice themselves to create Mundus, they are Mundus. They're the laws of nature. They're the fabric of reality. The Daedra can invade, they can cause chaos, but they can't fundamentally change how the world works. The Aedra can because they are the world. That's why the Aedra are worshipped as good gods and the Daedra are often seen as demons. It's not that the Aedra are morally superior. Plenty of Daedra are relatively benign. Azura cares about her followers. Meridia hates undead and corruption. But the Aedra created the world mortals live in and they gave up everything to do it. That sacrifice is why they're revered. There's another layer to this. The Aedra and Daedra aren't good and evil. They're order and chaos. The Aedra represents stability, creation, the laws that let mortals thrive. The Daedra represent change, ambition, freedom from rules. Both are necessary. If the Aedra had total control, nothing would ever change. If the Daedra had total control, reality would collapse into chaos. Mundus exists in the balance between them. The Aedra create the stage. The Daedra provide the conflict. Mortals live and die and create their own meaning in between. Some of the Aedra blur the line. Magnus abandoned creation before it was finished, so he's not quite an Aedra and not quite a Daedra. He's a Magna Ge, one of the spirits who fled to Aetherius. Meridia used to be a Magna Ge too, but she eventually became a Daedric prince. These transitions show that the categories aren't absolute. Power and purpose can shift. So, bringing it all together. Are the Aedra dead? Not in the traditional sense. They're not gone. They're not destroyed. But they're not active either. They exist in a state that's somewhere between life and death, consciousness and unconsciousness, presence and absence. They can grant blessings through shrines because they left pieces of their divine essence in the world. Those shrines are like batteries charged with Aedric power. When you pray, you tap into that power. They can manifest through avatars like Marten Septim when the right conditions are met. Dragonborn blood, powerful artifacts, desperate circumstances. These things can channel Aedric power into the mortal world. They can empower mortals like the Vestige through rituals that use their divine energy. It costs a lot, usually a soul or a life, but it can be done. But they can't just appear and chat with you. They can't walk around near and causing trouble or handing out quests. They're too weak, too bound to the world itself, too dormant. The term dead gods is more metaphorical than literal. It means they're shadows of what they once were. They're spent, exhausted, transformed into something else. They're the laws of nature, the cycle of life and death, the turning of seasons, the passage of time. They're not individuals anymore, they're forces. Except when they need to be individuals. When the world is in danger, when a Daedric prince tries to destroy Mundus, when the barriers between realms are breaking down, the Aedra can still act. It's hard, it's costly, and it's rare, but they can do it. That's the genius of Elder Scrolls lore. The Aedra are both dead and alive. They're both absent and present. They're both powerless and all-powerful. It depends on perspective, on belief, on circumstances. And the evolution of this concept across the games makes it even richer. Arena and Daggerfall treated them like generic fantasy gods. Morrowind made them tragic figures who sacrificed everything. Oblivion showed they could still save the world when pushed to the limit. Skyrim grounded their worship in everyday Nord culture. ESO explored their influence in an era when they were slightly more active. Each game adds a new piece to the puzzle. Each one shows a different facet of what it means to be an Aedra. And the community is still debating the details, still finding new interpretations, still discovering connections. Here's another angle worth considering. What if the Aedra being dead is exactly what makes them trustworthy? Think about it. The Daedric princes are active, conscious, scheming. They have agendas. Molag Bal wants to dominate everything. Mehrunes Dagon wants to destroy and recreate. Hermaeus Mora wants all knowledge. When you deal with a Daedric prince, you're dealing with a being who has wants and needs and plans. The Aedra don't have that anymore. They're not scheming. They're not manipulating. They gave up the ability to do that when they created Mundus. Their blessings are pure, uncomplicated gifts. They don't come with hidden costs or twisted bargains. You pray, you get a blessing, that's it. This makes them fundamentally different from the Daedra. The Daedra offer you power, but there's always a catch. The Ring of Namira makes you cannibal. The Ebony Blade gets stronger the more you murder your friends. Mehrunes Razor can kill anyone instantly, but it might fail when you need it most. Edric blessings are simple. Akatosh makes your magicka regenerate faster. Arkai gives you more health. Stendarr helps you block. No tricks, no costs, no hidden agendas. Because the Aedra aren't conscious enough to have agendas anymore. There's a purity to that. A god who can't scheme is a god you can trust. A god who gave up everything for creation is a god who genuinely cares about mortals, not because of what they can get from you, but because you literally are them. Mortals are made from the bodies of the El Nofei, who were Aedra. When you worship Akatosh, you're worshipping your own distant ancestor. That's heavy. That's the kind of lore that makes Elder Scrolls so compelling. It's not just, here's a god, worship them and get buffs. It's, here's a cosmic tragedy where divine beings gave up everything to create you, and now they exist as fading echoes of what they once were. Let's also address some of the fan theories and debates around this topic. Because oh boy, does the Elder Scrolls community love to argue about this stuff. One popular theory is that the Aedra aren't actually individual beings anymore. They're aspects of a single consciousness that's been fragmented. When people worship Akatosh, they're worshipping the time aspect. When they worship Kinnereth, they're worshipping the nature aspect. But it's all the same underlying divine essence, just filtered through different cultural lenses. This would explain why different cultures have such different versions of the same gods. Akatosh to the Imperials is the dragon god of time who values order and duty. Auriel to the Altmer is the king of the Altmer who represents elvish superiority. Alkosh to the Khajiit is a great cat dragon who defends the timeline. Same god, wildly different interpretations. If the Aedra are fragmented aspects of one consciousness, then mortal belief shapes which aspect manifests. The Nords worship Kain as a warrior, so that's the aspect they connect with. The Imperials worship Qewvr as a gentle nature goddess, so that's what they experience. Neither is wrong, they're just accessing different parts of the same divine being. Another theory is that the Aedra are actually prisoners of Lorcan. Some texts suggest Lorcan tricked them into creating Mundus, specifically to trap them. By binding themselves to creation, they became unable to leave. They're stuck in Mundus, slowly being drained of power, while Lorcan achieves his real goal of creating a realm where mortals can exist free from the tyranny of the gods. In this interpretation, the dead gods aren't noble sacrifices, they're cosmic hostages. Lorcan is the hero who freed mortals from the control of the Etada by trapping those Etada in the world itself. That's why elves hate him and humans love him. Elves see it as a curse that stripped them of their divinity. Humans see it as a gift that allowed them to exist. There's also debate about whether the Aedra will ever return to full power. Some sources suggest they're permanently diminished, that creating Mundus was a one-way transformation. Others hint that if mortals all stopped existing, if Mundus was destroyed, the Aedra might return to their original forms. But that would mean genocide on a cosmic scale, so nobody seriously wants that. A darker theory is that the Aedra are feeding on mortal souls. The Order of the Ancestor Moth says mortal souls are Aedric essence. When mortals die and go to Aetherius, maybe their souls are reabsorbed by the Aedra, slowly restoring divine power. That would make mortal existence a cycle where the Aedra create mortals, mortals live and die, and their souls return to the Aedra to sustain them. This isn't confirmed anywhere, but it would add a sinister undertone to the whole thing. Are the Aedra noble sacrifices, or are they cosmic farmers growing mortal souls to harvest? Then there's the question of what happens in the far future. Elder Scrolls lore has this concept called the Landfall, mentioned in some of Michael Kirkbride's out-of-game writings. It's a future apocalypse where Nirn is destroyed and mortals have to flee to the moons. If that happens, what becomes of the Aedra? Do they die with the world? Do they finally get released? Do they transform into something new? The lore doesn't give us clear answers, and that's intentional. Elder Scrolls thrives on ambiguity. Different sources contradict each other. Different cultures have different myths. The truth is unknowable because you're a mortal looking at cosmic events you can't fully comprehend. Let's talk about specific Aedra and how their death affects them differently, because not all the divines are in the same state. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, is probably the most active. He's literally time itself. He can't be fully dormant because time keeps moving. His influence is constant and unavoidable. The dragonborn bloodline is proof he still has agency. Dragons are his children, and they keep being born. The prophecies about the last dragonborn suggest Akatosh has plans. Arkai, the god of life and death, is also inherently active because life and death keep happening. Every time someone dies, that's Arkai's sphere of influence. His priests oppose necromancy because it disrupts the natural cycle he embodies. He's not conscious in the way a person is, but he's a constant presence in the cycle of existence. Qewvr, goddess of air and sky, is similar. Wind keeps blowing, weather keeps changing. She's the atmosphere itself. When the Greybeards use the Tuum, they're channeling her power, whether they realize it or not. She's not awake, but she's not absent either. Dibella, goddess of beauty and love, is more passive. Her sphere is art and affection. Those things happen, but they don't require divine intervention. Her blessings help with speechcraft, which is a social thing, not a natural force. She's probably more dormant than the others. Julianos, god of wisdom and logic, is another passive one. Knowledge and logic are mortal pursuits. The Elder Scrolls are kept by his monastic orders, which is interesting because the scrolls exist outside of time and causality. Maybe Julianos still has some connection to them. Mara, goddess of love and compassion, manifests through mortal emotions. Every marriage, every act of kindness, that's her influence. She's not directing these things, but she's present in them. When you marry someone in Skyrim through the Temple of Mara, you're invoking her blessing on the union. Stendarr, god of mercy, is similar to Mara. His sphere is compassion and charity. The vigilance of Stendarr hunt Aedra and undead in his name, believing they're doing his work. Whether Stendarr is actively guiding them or they're just using his name is unclear. Zenithar, god of work and commerce, is probably the most dormant. His sphere is labor and trade, which are entirely mortal activities. He might as well not exist except as an ideal that people strive toward. Then there's Talos, the ninth divine. He's different from the others because he was a mortal who achieved godhood. Tiber Septim, also known as Talos, conquered Tamriel and founded the Third Empire. When he died, he ascended to become a god. How? That's the million-gold question. Some say he mantled Lorkhan, becoming the new version of the missing god. Some say the belief of millions of worshippers made him divine. Some say he used the new medium, a giant reality-warping brass god, to retroactively insert himself into history as a god. Whatever the truth, Talos is the only divine who was born mortal. That makes him special. The Thalmor, the high elf faction in Skyrim, claim he's not a real god. They banned his worship. This sparked a civil war in Skyrim between the Empire that caved to the ban and the Stormcloaks who refused to give up Talos worship. The thing is, Talos might actually be active. He's the newest god, so maybe he hasn't faded like the others. Some players report getting blessings from Talos shrines that seem more responsive than other divines. Ulfric Stormcloak is basically a Talos fanatic, and his rebellion has major implications for Skyrim's future. If Talos is still awake and aware, he's the only Aedra who is. That would make him incredibly dangerous and incredibly powerful. A god who retained consciousness and agency while also having the power of an Aedra would be something entirely new in Elder Scrolls lore. There's also the weird situation with Trinimac and Malakath. Trinimac was an Aedric warrior who fought alongside Auriel. He's the one who ripped out Lorkhan's heart. But, according to legend, the Daedric prince Boethia ate Trinimac and excreted him out as Malakath, the Daedric prince of outcasts. Yeah, that's a thing that supposedly happened. If that's true, then Trinimac, an Aedra, was transformed into Malakath, a Daedra. This would mean the categories aren't as fixed as they seem. A being can move from one to the other under the right circumstances. Or maybe the legend is false and Malakath just made it up to mess with people. See, this is what makes Elder Scrolls lore so frustrating and so fascinating. Nothing is certain. Everything is told from a perspective. The in-game books contradict each other. The developers intentionally leave things vague. You have to piece together the truth from unreliable sources, and even then, you might be wrong. So, after all this, what's the answer? How can the Aedra grant wishes if they're dead? The answer is that they're not dead in the way we understand death. They're transformed. They're diminished. They're bound to the world they created. But they still exist, and they still have power, just not the kind of active, conscious power the Aedra have. Their power is in the world itself. When you pray at a shrine, you're accessing that power. When you fight for justice, you're channeling Stendarr. When you create something beautiful, you're channeling the Bella. The Aedra are the ideals mortals strive toward, the forces that govern existence, the framework reality operates within. And in extreme circumstances, when the world is threatened, when the barriers between realms are breaking, when a Daedric prince manifests on Nirn, the Aedra can still act. They can channel their power through the right mortal, at the right time, in the right place. It costs everything, but they can do it. Martin Septim proved that. The Vestige proved that. The Dragonborn proves that every time they use the tomb, Aedric power is still real, still potent, still capable of changing the world. The Aedra aren't dead. They're sleeping. They're waiting. They're woven into the fabric of existence so deeply that you can't separate them from the world they created. And that's exactly why they can still grant wishes, still answer prayers, still save the world when it needs saving. They're the most tragic figures in Elder Scrolls lore. They gave up everything, they sacrificed their consciousness and their power, they became prisoners in their own creation. But that sacrifice is also what makes them gods worth worshipping. Now, let's get into some of the weirder implications of all this. Because once you start thinking about the Aedra being dead, but not really, a bunch of strange questions pop up. First, what about prayers? Do the Aedra actually hear them? When you stand in front of a shrine and ask for help, is anyone listening? Probably not in the way you think. The Aedra aren't sitting in Aetherius with their ears perked up waiting for someone to say their name. They're too dormant for that. But that doesn't mean prayers are useless. Think about it like this. The Aedra set up these systems before they went dormant. Shrines are focal points of divine energy. Temples are built on places where the barrier between Mundus and Aetherius is thin. When you pray, you're not having a conversation. You're performing a ritual that activates the divine mechanism they left behind. It's like leaving a vending machine. You put in a coin, you press a button, you get a snack. The person who built the vending machine doesn't need to be there for it to work. The Aedra built shrines the same way. They programmed them with divine energy that responds to sincere prayer. But here's where it gets interesting. Some sources suggest that concentrated belief can actually wake the Aedra up, at least a little bit. If millions of people worship Akatosh and pray to him every day, all that psychic energy has to go somewhere. Maybe it flows to Aetherius and gives Akatosh just a tiny bit more awareness, a little more ability to act. This would explain why Talos is potentially more active than the other divines. He has millions of Nord worshippers who pray to him daily, who see him as the ultimate hero, who fight wars in his name. All that belief might be sustaining his consciousness in a way the older Aedra don't have anymore. It also explains why the Talmor want to ban Talos worship. If belief sustains godhood, then removing belief removes the god. The Talmor goal isn't just political, it's theological. They want to erase Talos from existence by making people stop believing in him. And if they succeed with Talos, what stops them from going after the other divines? The Thalmor have this whole plan to unmake Mundus and return to their divine forms. Removing the gods who created Mundus might be step one. This brings up another question. Can mortals create gods through belief alone? The tribunal achieved godhood through Lorkhan's heart, but what about pure faith? There's some evidence for this. The Skal, a Nord tribe in Sol's time, worship something called the All-Maker. It's not one of the 8 divines, it's their own god. And their shamans can use magic granted by the All-Maker. So either the All-Maker is real and separate from the other gods, or the Skal's collective belief created something that functions like a god. The Red Guards have their own pantheon too. They worship Satakal, the serpent god of everything, who sheds his skin to create new world skins. They have Ruptka, the tall Papa, who taught the spirits how to survive Satakal's hunger. These gods are different from the Aedra and Daedra, but they clearly have power because Redguard priests can perform miracles. Are these just different names for the same gods, or are they completely separate entities created by cultural belief? The lore doesn't give a clear answer. Then you've got the Khajiit and their Riddlethar. They worship Alkosh, who's probably Akatosh, but also Azura, who's definitely the Daedric prince Azura, and Joan and Jode, the twin moons, which might be the corpses of Lorkhan, depending on who you ask. The Khajiit blur the line between Aedra and Daedra worship in ways that would horrify imperial priests. And the Argonians worship the Hist, which are ancient sentient trees that may or may not be older than the Aedra themselves. The Hist came from a previous universe, survived the destruction of that universe, and now exist in Mundus, giving the Argonians prophetic visions through hallucinogenic sap. So the Aedra aren't the only divine game in town, they're just the most widespread in human cultures, and this diversity suggests that divinity is more complicated than Aedra good, Daedra bad. Let's talk about dragon breaks, because they're relevant to understanding how the Aedra function. A dragon break is when Akatosh, the dragon god of time, breaks. Time stops being linear. Multiple contradictory timelines happen simultaneously. When the dragon break ends, all those timelines collapse into one, and history becomes a mess of conflicting accounts where everything both did and didn't happen. The first dragon break happened when the Alessian Order tried to remove the elvish aspects from Akatosh. They were messing with the nature of a god, and reality couldn't handle it. Time shuddered for over 1,000 years. When it ended, nobody could agree on what happened during that period, because everything happened. The second major dragon break was at the end of Daggerfall. You activate the Numidium, and it causes a localized dragon break in the Iliac Bay region. Multiple endings to the game all happen at once. 6 different factions all get what they want simultaneously, even though those outcomes contradict each other. The fact that messing with the Aedra causes dragon breaks proves they're still connected to reality in a direct way. Akatosh doesn't just represent time, he is time. When his nature changes, time itself breaks. You can't do that to a dead god. A corpse can't break reality just by being poked. This suggests the Aedra are more like fundamental constants of the universe than beings. Changing gravity would break physics. Changing Akatosh breaks time. Same concept. But if they're constants, can they be destroyed? What happens if an Aedra truly dies? We kind of know the answer, because Lorkhan did die. His heart was ripped out, and even though the heart survived, Lorkhan himself was scattered. His body became the moon's, according to some myths. His spirit became the Shezarines, mortal heroes who carry a piece of his divine spark. The world didn't end when Lorkhan died, but the world did change. Mortals exist because Lorkhan created the conditions for mortality. If he hadn't died, if he'd remained a full-power Aedra, maybe mortals wouldn't have free will. Maybe they'd just be extensions of the gods. So, Lorkhan's death was necessary for mortal agency. His sacrifice gave mortals the ability to choose their own fate, to reject the gods, to become something new. That's heavy. That's the kind of thing that makes you reconsider what death even means in this context. Lorkhan died so mortals could live. The other Aedra gave up their active consciousness so mortals could have a stable world. These aren't failures. These are intentional sacrifices with cosmic implications. Now let's talk about the towers. Oh boy, the towers. In Elder Scrolls lore, there are these mystical constructs called the towers. They're not always literal towers, but they're pillars that hold reality together. Each tower has a stone, a source of power that keeps it active. The original tower is the Adamantine Tower, also called Adamantia. It's the oldest structure in Mundus, built by the Aedra during creation. Its stone is Zero Stone, which is whatever was left after creation was finished. This tower represents the very concept of structure and stability. Other towers include Red Mountain in Morrowind, whose stone was the heart of Lorkhan, White Gold Tower in the Imperial City, whose stone was the Amulet of Kings, the Crystal Tower in Somerset Isle, the Throat of the World in Skyrim. Each one anchors reality in some way. Here's the thing. Multiple towers have been deactivated. The Heart of Lorkhan was freed in Morrowind, deactivating Red Mountain. The Amulet of Kings was shattered at the end of Oblivion, deactivating White Gold. The Crystal Tower was destroyed in Eso. According to some interpretations of the lore, when all the towers fall, reality itself will collapse. Mundus will unmake itself. The Aedra's creation will come undone. Is this related to the Aedra being dead? Maybe. The towers might be the final anchors keeping the Aedra connected to Mundus. As each tower falls, the Aedra lose a little more of their ability to sustain the world. Eventually, they'll be too weak to hold it together, and everything will end. Or maybe the towers falling is part of a natural cycle. The Aedra created them to stabilize Mundus in its early days, but now mortals have evolved to the point where they don't need the training wheels anymore. Removing the towers might be the final step in Lorkhan's plan to free mortals from divine control. We don't know. The games haven't gotten there yet. But it's a popular fan theory that the series is building toward some kind of apocalyptic ending where the last tower falls and players have to deal with the consequences. Let's circle back to the gameplay mechanics of Shrine Blessings, because there's actually some interesting lore implications there. In Skyrim, you can only have one blessing active at a time. If you pray at a shrine of Akatosh and then pray at a shrine of Mara, the Akatosh blessing goes away. Why? Lore-wise, this might be because your body can only channel so much divine energy at once. Each blessing is a conduit to Aetherius, a stream of divine power flowing through you. Try to have multiple streams and you'll burn out. So the blessings are mutually exclusive for your own safety. Or it might be that the blessings come from a limited pool of energy in each shrine. When you take a blessing, you're draining a little bit of power from the shrine. It recharges over time, but you can't stack multiple drains on yourself at once. But here's a weird thing. In Oblivion, you could have all 9 blessings active at the same time if you visited all 9 shrines. The game lets you stack them. So either the lore changed between games, or Cyrodiil's shrines work differently than Skyrim's shrines. Maybe it's cultural. Cyrodiilic priests maintain the shrines more carefully, so they can sustain multiple blessings. Nord priests are more rough and tumble, so their shrines are simpler and can't multitask. Or maybe it's just a gameplay change and we shouldn't read too much into it. But that's the fun of Elder Scrolls lore. You can dig into everything, even the mechanics, and find possible explanations that make the world richer. Let's talk about the Tribunal again, because they're a really interesting contrast to the Aedra. Vivec, Almalexia, and Sotasil achieved godhood through the heart of Lorkhan. They used Kagrenac's tools to tap into the heart's power and became living gods. But their godhood was different from the Aedra's. They were conscious. They could walk around, talk to people, rule Morrowind directly. Vivec literally appears in Morrowind and has conversations with you. He's written thousands of pages of weird metaphysical sermons. He's very much awake and active. So why weren't the Tribunal like the Aedra? Why didn't achieving godhood make them dormant? Because they didn't create anything. The Aedra's death comes from the act of creation. They poured their essence into Mundus, binding themselves to it. The Tribunal just borrowed power from a source that already existed. They were mortal souls piloting divine energy, not divine beings transforming into the world itself. This distinction is important. It means godhood in Elder Scrolls isn't a single thing. There are different kinds of gods with different levels of power and different limitations. The Aedra are unconscious but all-powerful within their spheres. They are the laws of nature. You can't escape time because you can't escape Akatosh. The Tribunal were conscious but limited. They could use magic, they could shape mortal affairs, but they couldn't change the laws of reality. And their power required constant maintenance. They had to return to the heart of Lorkhan periodically to recharge. When the Nerevarine severed the enchantments on the heart, the Tribunal lost their godhood. Vivec faded away. Almalexia went mad and was killed. Sotasil was murdered by Almalexia before that. Their divinity was temporary, borrowed, contingent. The Aedra's divinity is permanent but dormant. The Tribunal's divinity was active but temporary. Different trade-offs. Talos is somewhere in between. He achieved godhood somehow and it seems to be permanent, but he might also be more active than the ancient Aedra. He represents a new kind of divinity, human-made rather than primordial. Then you've got Manimarco, the king of worms. In Daggerfall, one of the possible endings is that Manimarco uses the Numidium to ascend to godhood. This creates a dragon break, where Manimarco both becomes a god and stays mortal. The god version becomes the Revenant, a Daedric prince of necromancy. The mortal version continues scheming in Cyrodiil. So, mortals can become Daedric princes too, apparently. The categories are way more fluid than they first appear. All of this points to a central truth about Elder Scrolls divinity. It's not about inherent worthiness or some cosmic hierarchy. It's about power and how you use it. The Aedra chose to create, and it cost them everything. The Daedra chose not to create, and they kept their freedom. Mortals can ascend if they find the right source of power and the right method. And Aedra being dead doesn't make them less impressive. If anything, it makes them more so. They had the power to remain eternal and unchanging like the Daedra, but they chose mortality by proxy. They chose to create something that could exist without them. That's love, in a weird cosmic way. True sacrifice means giving up something you can never get back for the sake of something you believe in. The Aedra believed in Mundus, in the mortal world, in the potential of beings who could choose their own path. So they gave up their consciousness their agency, their active existence to make that world real. The Daedra didn't make that choice. They're more powerful in conventional terms, but they're also sterile. They can't create, only transform. Molag Bal can dominate and enslave, but he can't make something new. Mehrunes Dagon can destroy and rebuild, but the rebuilding is just another version of destruction. The Daedra are eternal, but they are stuck. The Aedra are dying, but their creation lives on. Mortals grow, evolve, surprise even themselves. The world changes in ways the Aedra never planned. That's the beauty of their sacrifice. They made something that transcended them. Now let's get into some of the really obscure lore, the stuff from out-of-game texts and developer posts that may or may not be canon. Michael Kirkbride, one of the main lore writers for Morrowind, has written a bunch of stuff that's not in the games but has heavily influenced fan understanding of the lore. Some of it is cryptic, some of it is bizarre, and some of it completely recontextualizes everything. One of his concepts is Kim. It's a state of enlightenment where you realize you're a character in a dream, but instead of disappearing because you're not real, you assert I am and maintain your existence through will alone. Vivek supposedly achieved Kim, which is why he's so powerful and weird. Talos also achieved Kim, according to these texts. That's how a mortal became a god. He realized the universe is the dream of the Godhead, a sleeping deity who dreams all of existence into being. Instead of ceasing to exist when he realized he's just a dream character, Talos declared his own existence and became real through sheer force of will. If this is true, it adds another layer to what godhood means. The Aedra didn't achieve Kim, they're part of the dream, but they're not aware of it in the way Vivek or Talos supposedly are. So even though the Aedra are more primordially powerful, Talos might actually understand reality better than they do. Another Kirkbride concept is Amaranth, which is when you achieve Kim and then go beyond it. You become a new dreamer, creating your own universe separate from the Godhead's dream. Basically, you become a god by leaving existence entirely and creating a new existence. This is way out there, and it's not confirmed in any game, but it's fun to think about. What if the endpoint of mortal evolution is to become new godheads, dreaming new universes into being? What if that's what Lorkhan was really trying to do by creating Mundus, to give mortals the tools they need to transcend and create their own realities? Whether you accept this stuff as canon or not, it shows how deep Elder Scrolls lore can go. The question of whether the Aedra are dead becomes a question about the nature of consciousness, reality, and existence itself. Are the Aedra dead, or are they more real than anything else because they are the world? Are mortals more alive than the Aedra because mortals have agency? Or are mortals less real because they're temporary and fragile? There's no easy answer, and that's what makes it fascinating. Let's talk about something else. What do the Aedra think of each other? Do they have relationships, rivalries, friendships? We don't get a lot of info on this because, again, the Aedra aren't conscious enough to have complex social dynamics anymore. But we can infer some things from myths and from how their spheres interact. Akatosh and Lorkhan have the most complicated relationship. Akatosh, as Auriel, was the one who ripped out Lorkhan's heart. He saw Lorkhan as a traitor who doomed the Etada to mortality. But Akatosh also upheld the covenant with Saint Alessia and protected humanity, which was Lorkhan's creation. So there's this tension between punishing Lorkhan and honoring what he created. Some theories suggest Akatosh and Lorkhan are two halves of the same being. Akatosh is time, the progression of moments, the structure of causality. Lorkhan is space, the existence of places, the structure of location. Time and space together create the framework for reality. So they're opposites but also complements, locked in eternal conflict and eternal cooperation. Kinnereth and Kain are the same goddess, just different cultural interpretations. But her relationship with Lorkhan, Shor, is interesting. In Nord mythology, Kain is Shor's widow. She loved him, she mourned him when he was killed, and she continues to honor his memory. When the Greybeards teach you the Thu'um in Skyrim, they're teaching you the language kind created. It's her gift to mortals, a way to use dragon shouts without being dragonborn, in honor of Shor's sacrifice. Trinimac and Malakath's situation is weird. If the legend is true, and Boethia literally transformed Trinimac into Malaka, then Trinimac the Aedra no longer exists. He was corrupted into a Daedric prince. The Orsimer, the orcs, are the followers of Trinimac, who were also transformed when their god was transformed. They became outcasts, cursed, their very bodies changed. But some Orsimer still worship Trinimac, claiming he wasn't destroyed, just diminished. They reject Malakath and try to reclaim their lost glory. This schism causes a lot of tension in orc culture. Mara and Dibella both deal with love, but in different ways. Mara is romantic love, family bonds, compassion. Dibella is passion, beauty, artistic inspiration. They're not rivals. They're two aspects of the same human experience. Weddings invoke Mara, but marriages need Dibella's fire to stay exciting. They complement each other. Stendarr and Zenitar are both about mortal virtue, but Stendarr focuses on mercy and protection, while Zenitar focuses on honest work and prosperity. A merchant prays to Zenithar for a successful deal, but if the merchant then gives some profits to charity, that's Stendarr's influence. Julianos is kind of alone in his sphere. Wisdom and logic don't overlap with any other divines in obvious ways. He's the patron of mages and scholars, the god of rational thought in a world full of magic and myth. Fitting that he'd be isolated. Arkai is connected to all of them because everything alive eventually dies. Arkai's sphere touches every mortal's life. When you're born, Arkai starts the clock. When you die, Arkai guides you to Aetherius. His clergy are obsessed with preventing necromancy because it disrupts this natural order. Interestingly, there's a myth that Arkai was originally a mortal who became a god. If that's true, he predates Talos as a mortal turned divine, and he managed to integrate himself into the Aedric pantheon fully, instead of being controversial like Talos. These relationships are subtle because the Aedra can't actively hang out and talk, but their spheres of influence create a web of interconnections. The natural world runs on these principles working together. Time flows, life blooms, wisdom guides, love binds, mercy heals, work prospers. The Aedra aren't individuals anymore, they're a system. Compare that to the Daedra, who have very clear, very personal relationships. Sheogorath and Jiggalag are the same being split in two by a curse. Azura and Boethia are allies who sometimes work together. Molag Bal and Mehrunes Dagon hate each other because domination and destruction are opposing philosophies. The Daedra have drama, the Aedra are beyond drama. Let's talk about specific moments in the games where Aedric intervention was clearly happening, because even if the Aedra are dormant, there are times when their influence is undeniable. In Oblivion, Martin Septim's transformation is the obvious one. But there are smaller moments too. When you do the Knights of the Nine expansion, you're collecting relics of the Divine Crusader, a legendary hero who was blessed by the 8 divines. The relics are ancient, but they still carry divine power. The blessing of Talos Shrine actually appears when you put on the full armor set, adding a 9th divine blessing. When you wear the Crusader's relics and go to fight Umaril the Unfettered, you're essentially acting as a mortal champion for the Aedra. Umaril is an immortal Aedlite sorcerer who made a pact with the Daedra, and only someone blessed by the divines can kill him permanently. The quest is explicitly about the Aedra using you as a weapon against the Daedric threat. In Skyrim, there's a quest called The Blessings of Nature, where you restore the Gildergreen tree in Whiterun. The Gildergreen is a sacred tree of Kinnereth that's been damaged. You can either cut a new sapling from the original Eldergleam tree or perform a ritual to revive the damaged tree. If you choose to revive it, a priestess of Kinnereth prays, and the tree is instantly restored. Flowers bloom, birds gather, the whole thing becomes beautiful again. That's Kinnereth's power, manifesting through prayer and faith. She's not appearing, she's not talking, but she's clearly acting. There's another quest in Skyrim where you help a priest of Arkai investigate a vampire plot. Arkai's influence protects the priest from vampire corruption, and when you bless a ritual with Arkai's blessing, it disrupts the vampire's plans. Again, Arkai isn't showing up personally, but his power is real and tangible. In Elder Scrolls Online, there are way more direct Aedric moments. The Cold Harbor storyline ends with the Divines empowering you to fight Molag Bal, but there are smaller quests too. You might help a priest restore a shrine, and when you do, the divine presence becomes palpable. Light shines, warmth spreads, you feel the gods' attention even though they're not speaking. There's a Khajiit quest in Iso, where you help restore the lunar lattice, the mystical connection between the Khajiit and the moons. The moons are Joan and Jode, who might be the corpses of Lorkhan. When you fix the lattice, the Khajiit who were born during that period come out looking normal instead of monstrous. That's divine intervention through natural law, Lorkhan's lingering influence shaping reality even in death. All of these moments show that the Aedra aren't gone. They are present in subtle ways, in nature, in blessings, in the structure of the world. They can't monologue at you like Hermaius Mora, but they can heal trees, empower heroes, and shape births. That's a different kind of power, quieter but no less real. Now, let's dig into the philosophical implications. What does it mean for gods to sacrifice themselves? What does it say about the relationship between creators and their creation? In most fantasy settings, gods are all-powerful beings who create because they can. They're distant, unreachable, maybe they care about mortals, and maybe they don't. Elder Scrolls flips this on its head. The Aedra created the world, and it destroyed them. They're not all-powerful overseers. They're exhausted parents who gave everything for their children. Mortals in Tamriel literally exist because the gods died for them. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Every time you breathe, you're breathing air that exists because Kynareth gave up her divine form. Every time you experience a moment passing, that's Akatosh sacrificing his eternal nature to create linear time. This creates a really interesting theological dynamic. You can't blame the Aedra for the world's problems, because they can't fix those problems. They don't have the power anymore. Any evil, any suffering, any injustice in Mundus, that's on mortals now. The Aedra gave mortals free will and a world to live in, but mortals have to figure out the rest themselves. Compare this to blaming the Daedric princes. You absolutely can blame them for stuff because they're active participants. When Molag Bal creates vampires, he's choosing to do that. When Mehrunes Dagon sends cultists to cause chaos, he's responsible. The Daedra have agency, so they have accountability. The Aedra don't have agency anymore. They're more like the ground you stand on than people who can make choices. You don't blame the ground for earthquakes. You understand the geology is complicated and sometimes tectonic plates shift. Same with the Aedra. But mortals still worship them. Why? Gratitude, maybe. Reverence for the sacrifice. A desire to honor what was given up. The Aedra aren't gods you worship because you're afraid of them or because you want favors. You worship them because they literally made you possible. That's powerful. That's a relationship built on something deeper than fear or greed. It's built on acknowledgement of debt. Mortals owe their existence to the Aedra, and worship is how that debt is honored. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. The Altmer, High Elves, resent their mortality. They used to be divine beings, and Lorkhan tricked them into giving that up. From their perspective, the Aedra didn't sacrifice themselves for mortals. They were victims of Lorkhan's deception, and mortals are the cursed result. The Thalmor, the extremist faction of Altmer, want to undo creation itself. They want to destroy the towers, unmake Mundus, and return to the divine state they lost. This requires destroying Talos because he's the newest divine and the most active. But it doesn't stop there. They want to undo everything the Aedra created. Imagine being a god and having your creations actively try to kill you. That's the Aedra's situation. Most mortals worship them, but some mortals hate them so much that they're working to destroy reality itself just to erase the Aedra's legacy. And the Aedra can't defend themselves. They're too weak, too dormant, If the Talmor succeed, the Aedra won't be able to stop them. The only thing standing between the Thalmor and cosmic annihilation is other mortals who disagree with them. That's tragic on a level that's hard to articulate. The Aedra sacrificed everything to create life, and some of that life wants to destroy them for it. Let's talk about the cultural differences in how the Aedra are perceived. Because the Eight Divines worship is mostly an imperial thing, and other cultures have very different takes. The Nords have their own pantheon. They worship Shor instead of Lorkhan, Kain instead of Kynareth, Tsun instead of Xanathar. These aren't just name changes. They are different interpretations with different values. To the Nords, Shor is the ultimate hero. He created the world and was murdered by elven gods for it. The space where Shor should sit in Sovngarde, the Nord afterlife, is empty because he's dead. But his absence is honored. Warriors who die in battle hope to join him one day when he returns. The imperial cult downplays Lorkhan's importance. They focus on Akatosh as the chief god, the dragon who represents order and civilization. Lorkhan or Shazar is barely mentioned. This reflects imperial values of law, structure, and stability. The Altmer worship Auriel, their version of Akatosh, as the king of the gods who rightfully punished Lorkhan for his crimes. They also worship Trinimac, the warrior who helped Auriel rip out Lorkhan's heart. To them, Lorkhan is the villain of creation, not the hero. The Red Guards have Ruptga and Satakal, and a whole cosmology that barely overlaps with imperial religion. They see the world as cycles of creation and destruction, worldskins that are shed and regrown. Their gods are about surviving these cycles, not preventing them. The Khajiit see the divines through the Riddlethar, a complex system that combines Aedra and Daedra into one pantheon. Alkosh is Akatosh, but as a cat dragon. Azura is Azura, a Daedric prince, but she is worshipped as a creator goddess. To the Khajiit, the line between Aedra and Daedra is more about role than nature. The Dunmer used to worship the Tribunal, living gods who protected Morrowind. When the Tribunal fell, many Dunmer returned to worshipping the good Daedra, Azura, Boethia, and Mephala. They don't worship the Aedra much at all because they see the Aedra as distant and useless. Better to worship Daedra who actually answer prayers and curse your enemies. All of these perspectives are valid within their cultures. There's no one true interpretation. The gods are too vast, too incomprehensible for mortals to fully understand. Each culture sees the pieces that make sense to them and builds a mythology around it. This is one of the smartest things Elder Scrolls does with its lore. There's no objective truth handed down from on high. You have to piece together what happened from biased sources, conflicting myths, and cultural interpretations. Maybe the Nords are right and Shor is a hero. Maybe the Altmer are right and Lorkhan is a villain. Maybe both are right from different perspectives. The Aedra being dormant makes this even more interesting because they can't clarify. They can't show up and say, actually, here's what really happened. Mortals are left to argue about theology with no way to confirm who's correct. Let's dive into some specific Aedra and how their death affects their function. We touched on this earlier, but let's go deeper. Akatosh is the most active Aedra because he is time itself. Time doesn't stop. Every second that passes is Akatosh's influence. He can't be dormant the way other Aedra can because dormancy would mean time stops, and if time stops, nothing exists. So Akatosh is awake in a sense, just not conscious in the way mortals are conscious. The dragons are Akatosh's children. They are fragments of him, pieces of time-given form. When you kill a dragon in Skyrim and absorb its soul, you are taking a piece of Akatosh's power. The last Dragonborn is basically a mortal vessel for Akatosh's essence. You have a dragon soul in a mortal body, which makes you the perfect bridge between Aedric power and mortal agency. Alduin, the World Eater, is the firstborn of Akatosh. He's supposed to eat the world at the end of time, ushering in the next cycle of creation. But Alduin got greedy. He wanted to rule the world instead of ending it, so he's a perversion of Akatosh's will, a fragment of the time god that went rogue. When you kill Alduin in Skyrim, you're not killing time. You're killing a corrupted piece of time that refused to fulfill its purpose. Akatosh's overall function remains intact. Arkai is another interesting case. The Varieties of Faith in the Empire, an in-game book, says Arkai was a mortal shopkeeper who became obsessed with life and death. He prayed to Mara for understanding, and she granted him immortality just as he was dying. This paradox, being immortal at the moment of death, transformed him into the god of the cycle. If that's true, Arkai is a mortal who achieved Aedric status, making him a predecessor to Talos. But other sources say Arkai was always an Aedra, and the shopkeeper story is a myth. Like everything in Elder Scrolls, the truth is unclear. What's interesting is how Arkai functions. He's not the god of death like a Grim Reaper. He's the god of the proper cycle: birth, life, death, afterlife. Necromancy is an abomination to him because it disrupts that cycle. When you raise a corpse, you're trapping a soul that should have moved on to Aetherius. You're breaking Arkay's fundamental law. Priests of Arkay can detect undead, can harm them with blessed weapons, can even destroy them with prayer. This is Arkay's dormant power manifesting through his faithful. He can't wake up and smite necromancers himself, but he can empower mortals to do it for him. Kynareth, or Kine, is the goddess of air and storms. In Nordic tradition, she gave mortals the Thuum, the voice, as a gift to fight dragons. The Greybeards, monks who live on the throat of the world, dedicate their lives to her service. They use the Thuum only for worship, never for violence except in the most dire circumstances. When you learn the Thuum, you're channeling Kynareth's power. Every shout you use is her breath-given form. Dragons use the Thuum naturally because they're pieces of Akatosh, but mortals have to learn it through meditation and understanding. It's the difference between being a native speaker and learning a second language. Kynareth is also associated with the Elder Gleam tree and with nature in general. Spriggans, magical nature guardians, might be her creation or at least her servants. When forests grow, that's her influence. When storms rage, that's her anger or her joy, depending on interpretation. Dibella is the goddess of beauty and passion. Her worship is centered in Markarth, in Skyrim, where the Temple of Dibella trains young women to become Sibyls, priestesses who can see the future. This is interesting because foresight isn't usually associated with beauty, but maybe it makes sense. Beauty is about seeing the truth of something beneath the surface, and prophecy is about seeing the truth of time beneath the present. Dibella's blessings help with speechcraft, with persuasion and charm. She's the goddess of artists, lovers, musicians. In a world of war and politics, Dibella represents the gentler aspects of life. She's not weak though. Her followers can be fierce in defending beauty and art from those who would destroy it. Julianos is the god of wisdom, logic, and magic. He's the patron of the Mages Guild, though the guild doesn't require worship. Scholars pray to Julianos for insight, for understanding, for the ability to solve complex problems. His sphere overlaps with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, but in a different way. Julianos is about wisdom, applying knowledge ethically and logically. Hermaeus Mora is about knowledge for its own sake, hoarding secrets regardless of their use. Julianos would teach you how to use a spell responsibly. Hermaeus Mora would teach you the spell and watch with amusement as you destroy yourself with it. Mara is the goddess of love and compassion. She's the mother goddess, the one you pray to for family, for relationships, for emotional healing. In Skyrim, you can get married through the Temple of Mara by wearing an amulet of Mara and asking someone to marry you. The ceremony invokes Mara's blessing on the union. Mara's sphere is probably the most universally relevant. Everyone loves someone, everyone needs compassion. Even the hardest warrior prays to Mara when they're worried about their family. She's not flashy, but she's everywhere in the quiet moments of life. Stendarr is the god of mercy and justice. The Vigilants of Stendarr are basically witch hunters who travel around destroying Daedric influence. They fight vampires, werewolves, Daedric cultists, anyone corrupted by the bad Daedra. Stendarr's mercy is complicated. It's not soft. It's about giving people a chance to redeem themselves. But if they refuse, justice is harsh. The vigilance will kill corrupted people without hesitation if those people won't repent. It's mercy with teeth. Standar is also associated with healing and protection. His blessings help you block attacks with a shield, protecting yourself and others. He's the god you pray to when you're defending the innocent from evil. Zenitar is the god of work, trade, and prosperity. He's the merchant's god, the laborer's god. When you craft something, you're honoring Zenitar. When you make an honest living, that's his sphere. Zenitar is probably the most overlooked divine because his sphere is so mundane. There are no epic quests involving honest labor, but in the daily life of Tamriel, Zenitar is hugely important. Every transaction, every creation, every harvest, that's all under his influence. Then there's Talos, who we've talked about a lot, but let's go deeper. Talos is Tiber Septim, the conqueror who unified Tamriel and founded the Third Empire. He's also Wismir, the Nordic aspect of Lorkhan. He might also be Zurin, Arctus, and Wulfart, two other legendary figures. There's a theory called the Enantiomorph that suggests Talos is actually three people who merged into one being. Tiber Septim was the king, Zurin Arctus was the mage, and Wulfart was the rebel. Together, they formed a trinity that ascended to godhood. This would make Talos not just a man who became a god, but a cosmic formula that repeats throughout history. The Enantiomorph appears again and again in Elder Scrolls lore. The Tribunal was an Enantiomorph. Vivek was the middle, the balance. Almalexia was the wife, the feminine. Sotasil was the mystery, the withdrawn. Together they formed a god unit. Oriel, Trinimac, and Lorkhan might be another Enantiomorph. Oriel the king, Trinimac the warrior, Lorkhan the rebel. The rebel always dies or is betrayed, and his death creates something new. If Talos is an Enantiomorph, his death at the end of his mortal life was the catalyst for his ascension. Tiber Septim died, but Talos was born from the union of three mantling Lorkhan's role. This is all speculative, but it shows how deep the rabbit hole goes. Talos isn't just a guy who became a god. He's a cosmic pattern, a formula for divinity, a repeat of primordial events on a mortal scale. And the Talmor know this. That's why they're so desperate to erase him. If mortals can achieve divinity through the Enantiomorph, if they can mantle gods and take their places, then the Thalmor's dream of returning to their divine state is achievable. But that means accepting Lorkhan's gift, accepting Mundus, accepting mortality as the path to transcendence. The Talmor refuse. They want to go backward, to unmake Mundus and return to primordial divinity. Talos represents the forward path, embracing mortality and using it to achieve something greater. These are fundamentally opposed philosophies, and the war between the Empire and the Talmor is really a war over the future of existence itself. Do mortals embrace their nature and evolve, or do they reject their nature and try to return to a lost golden age? That's the real question underlying the civil war in Skyrim. Let's talk about Shezarins, the mortal incarnations of Lorkhan. These are heroes throughout history who carry a piece of Lorkhan's divine spark. They're not reincarnations exactly, more like echoes or avatars. Pelinal Whitestrake is probably the most famous Shezarin. He was a legendary warrior from the First Era who helped Saint Alessia overthrow the Aelids, the elven slavers who ruled Cyrodiil. Pelinal was insane with rage, killing elves by the thousands. He was described as having the heart of Lorkhan, which might be literal or metaphorical. The Riemann dynasty might have been Shezarins. Riemann Cyrodiil founded the Second Empire and pushed back the Akaviri invasion. He had dragon blood, which is connected to Lorkhan somehow. Wulfarth Ash King was a Nord hero who died multiple times and kept coming back. He was known as the Breath of Kine, and he could shout so powerfully that he destroyed armies. He was definitely a Shezarin, a mortal vessel for Shor's will. Talos might be the latest Shezarin, or he might be Lorkhan fully restored. There's a theory that by mantling Lorkhan, Talos literally became the new version of the missing god, filling the empty throne in Sovngarde. And maybe you, the player character, are a Shezarene too. The last Dragonborn has Akatosh's soul, but Akatosh and Lorkhan are opposites that define each other. You're the prisoner, the one who starts every Elder Scrolls game in chains. Prisoners are a recurring theme connected to Lorkhan, who was bound and killed. If the player characters throughout the series are all Shezarenes, it explains why you're always the one who changes history. You're a fragment of the god who created the world, given mortal form to make sure the world doesn't end. When reality is threatened, a piece of Lorkhan awakens and fixes it. This is never confirmed, but it's a compelling theory, and it ties back to the Aedra being dead. Lorkhan is the most dead of all the Aedra, his body literally ripped apart, but his spirit keeps returning through mortals. He's too stubborn to stay dead because his work isn't finished. Now, let's look at how shrine blessings have evolved mechanically across the games, because the changes reflect shifting understanding of the lore. In Arena and Daggerfall, blessings were simple buffs. You prayed, you got a stat boost, end of story. There wasn't much lore attached. In Morrowind, the Tribunal Temple was the main religion, and the Tribunal were living gods you could meet. Shrines to the Imperial gods existed, but were less prominent. This reflected the political reality of Morrowind being autonomous from the Empire. Oblivion made the 9 Divines central. Every city had a chapel with shrines to all 9. You could get blessings easily, and they lasted until you got a disease or activated another shrine. The blessings were tied to the Amulet of Kings plotline, with the idea that Akatosh's covenant protected the Empire. Skyrim brought back individual shrines scattered around the world. Instead of one chapel with 9 shrines, you had to travel to find specific gods. This made the world feel more lived in. People built shrines where they mattered, not in centralized temples. Skyrim also changed blessings to last 8 hours of real time, which is roughly 2 days of game time. This made them more temporary, but also more valuable. You had to think about when to activate a blessing. Elder Scrolls Online has shrines everywhere, and you can have one blessing active at a time. But ESO also introduced Mundus stones, which are different from shrine blessings. Mundus stones are connected to the constellations, to the stars, which are the holes left by Magnus and the Magna Ge. So, Mundus stones are connected to magic at a cosmic level, separate from Aedric worship. The evolution shows that Bethesda has been thinking more carefully about how religion works in Tamriel. Early games treated it as a gameplay mechanic. Later games integrated it into the world building. Let's talk about one of the weirdest pieces of Aedric lore, the Mnemoly. This is a star, or maybe a group of stars, associated with Kinnereth, but Mnemoly is also called the Blue Star, and it's connected to dragon breaks. During a dragon break, when time shatters, Mnemoly appears. She's described as a group of stars that don't exist in normal time. Some texts call her the Shezarene of Kynareth, a hybrid of Kynareth's and Lorkhan's essence. What does this mean? Nobody knows for sure. It might be that Kynareth and Lorkhan had a connection, a collaboration that produced something that exists outside normal time. Mnemoly might be their child, a divine being that only appears when reality breaks. Or it might be metaphorical. The blue star could represent moments of possibility, times when history could go multiple directions. Dragon breaks are times of ultimate freedom, when causality doesn't apply, and Mnemoly is the symbol of that freedom. This is the kind of deep lore that casual players never encounter, but it's there, hidden in obscure texts, hinting at connections between gods that reshape how you understand the cosmology. Let's address another question. If the Aedra are dead or dormant, why do their artifacts still work? The Crusaders' relics in Oblivion carry divine power. The Amulet of Kings channeled Akatosh's essence. How? The answer is probably similar to shrines. These artifacts were created when the Aedra were more active, or they were created by mortals and blessed with divine power. Once blessed, they hold that power indefinitely as long as they're not destroyed. The Amulet of Kings is interesting because it was created through a blood pact between Alessia and Akatosh. Alessia's mortal blood and Akatosh's divine blood mingled, creating something that bridged the gap between Mundus and Aetherius. As long as someone with dragonborn blood wore the amulet and lit the dragon fires, the barrier between Oblivion and Mundus stayed strong. When Martin shattered the amulet, he released all that stored divine energy at once. It was enough to manifest Akatosh's full form temporarily, but it destroyed the artifact permanently. Now there's no Amulet of Kings, no covenant, no barrier. The Oblivion Crisis was the end of that era. Skyrim takes place 200 years after Oblivion, and the world has changed. The Empire is weak, Daedric influence is growing. There's no divine protection anymore, just mortals struggling to survive. This progression shows the Aedra getting weaker over time, or at least their ability to intervene getting more limited. In the first era, the Aedra walked Nirn occasionally. In the second era, they could still perform miracles through the right rituals. In the third era, they needed powerful artifacts and rare bloodlines. In the fourth era, they are almost entirely absent. If this trend continues, the fifth era might be a time when the Aedra are completely gone. Mortals would be entirely on their own, which might be Lorkhan's ultimate goal. Free mortals in a world no longer controlled by gods. Or maybe the cycle reverses. Maybe mortal belief can restore the Aedra's power. If enough people worship and pray and perform the right rituals, maybe the Aedra can wake up. Maybe that's the secret to saving them, or maybe that's the trap that keeps them imprisoned. Let's get into some of the creation myths from different cultures, because they reveal different understandings of what the Aedra are. The Altmeri creation myth says that all spirits were once part of Anu, the primordial force of stasis. They existed in timeless perfection. Then Lorkhan convinced them to create Mundus, which introduced time, death, and suffering. The spirits who participated lost their divinity and became trapped in the mortal world. To the Altmer, this is a tragedy. They're cursed with mortality, cut off from their divine nature. The Aedra aren't heroes, they're victims, and Lorkhan is the demon who caused it all. The Nordic creation myth says that Shor saw his brothers growing complacent in their divine realm. They were stagnant, unchanging, boring. So he proposed creating a world where spirits could test themselves, could grow, could become more than they were. Some spirits agreed enthusiastically, others were reluctant. The elven gods, Alduin included, opposed Shor. They wanted things to stay the same forever, but Shor won out, and Mundus was created. Then the elven gods turned on Shor. They killed him and scattered his body. But Shor's sacrifice made mortals possible, and mortals have the potential to surpass even the gods. To the Nords, this is a triumph. Mortality is a gift, not a curse. The Khajiit myth is different again. They say Fadomai, the eldest spirit, gave birth to many children, including Nirni, the world, and Azura, the Daedric prince. When Nirni wanted children of her own, Azura helped her create the Khajiit and gave them the ability to change shape. Then Lorkhaj, the Khajiit version of Lorkhan, tricked Nirni's other children into settling in Mundus permanently. His heart was darkness, corrupted by the dark behind the world. But his corruption made free will possible, so the Khajiit honor him even though he's cursed. The Redguard myth involves Sep, a snake god who convinced the spirits to create the world by promising they'd have power over it. But Sep was lying. The spirits gave up their power, and Sep kept it for himself, until Ruptga, the Tall Papa, destroyed him and taught the spirits how to survive. All of these myths describe the same event, the creation of Mundus, but with wildly different interpretations. To the elves, it's a cosmic crime. To the humans, it's the greatest gift. To the Khajiit, it's a necessary evil. To the Redguards, it's a cautionary tale about deception. Who's right? All of them, probably. The creation of Mundus was all of those things. It was a sacrifice, a trick, a gift, a crime, a victory, a defeat. The Aedra experienced it differently, and mortals experienced the results differently based on their values. This ambiguity is what makes Elder Scrolls lore so rich. There's no narrator telling you the objective truth. You have to weigh different accounts and decide what you believe. So, where does all of this leave us? After going through the history, the theology, the philosophy, the mechanics, the cultural interpretations, what's the final answer? How can the Aedra grant wishes if they're dead? They can grant wishes because they're not dead in any conventional sense. They're transformed. They became the world. Every law of nature is an Aedra's sacrifice made manifest. Every breath of air, every passing second, every cycle of life and death, that's the Aedra doing what they do. The shrines work because the Aedra imbued them with power before they faded. These shrines are like batteries, charged with divine essence that recharges slowly from Aetherius. When you pray sincerely, the shrine activates and grants you a blessing. It's an automated system, but it's still powered by real divine energy. The Aedra can manifest when the conditions are exactly right. Dragonborn blood, powerful artifacts, desperate circumstances, enormous sacrifices. When all of these align, an Aedra can channel the remaining power through a mortal vessel and act directly in the world. It's rare, it's costly, but it's possible. They influence reality through natural law. Akatosh is time, so time keeps flowing. Arkai is the cycle of life and death, so that cycle continues. Kinnereth is the wind, so the wind keeps blowing. They don't need to be conscious to fulfill these roles, because they are these roles. And maybe, just maybe, concentrated belief can wake them up a little. Millions of prayers, millions of faithful, all of that psychic energy flowing to Aetherius. It might give the Aedra just enough awareness to nudge things in the right direction when it really matters. The Aedra are the most tragic and most beautiful concept in Elder Scrolls lore. They sacrificed everything to create a world where beings could be free, could choose their own paths, could become something new. They gave up consciousness, power, agency, everything that made them gods, because they believed in the potential of mortals. And mortals live in that world every day, mostly not realizing what was sacrificed for them. The ground they walk on is the body of dead gods. The air they breathe is a goddess's final gift. Time itself is a god's last act of will before fading into dormancy. That's heavier than any epic quest or dramatic boss fight. It's a cosmic tragedy that plays out in every mundane moment of existence in Tamriel. But it's also hopeful, because if the Aedra could sacrifice themselves to create something greater, then maybe mortals can too. Maybe the endpoint of mortal evolution is to become like the Aedra, to create and sacrifice and enable the next generation of existence. The Aedra aren't dead. They're waiting to see what mortals do with the gift they were given, waiting to see if the sacrifice was worth it. And every time a mortal does something good, something creative, something that makes the world better, that's the Aedra's answer. It was worth it. When you walk past a shrine and get a blessing, you're experiencing the fading echo of a god who loved the idea of you enough to stop being a god. That's what makes the Aedra special. That's what makes their blessings meaningful, even if they come from automated shrines powered by distant, dormant beings. The Aedra offer power, but they're always watching, always judging, always ready to take it back. The Aedra's gifts are unconditional because they can't take them back. They don't have the power anymore. They trusted mortals with the world and stepped back, knowing mortals might ruin it, but believing they'd make it beautiful instead. So, the next time you're playing Skyrim or Oblivion or Elder Scrolls Online, and you walk up to a shrine and pray for a blessing, take a second to think about what that means. You're not just getting a buff, you're touching the remnant of a cosmic sacrifice. You're receiving a gift from a being that ceased to exist so you could exist. The Aedra can grant wishes because they already granted the biggest wish possible. They wished for a world where mortals could thrive, and they made it real by becoming that world. Every smaller wish, every blessing, every miracle, those are just echoes of that original wish. And as long as Mundus exists, as long as time flows and life continues and mortals keep striving, the Aedra's wish is being fulfilled. They're dead, but their dream is alive. And maybe that's the only kind of immortality that actually matters. That's the answer to the question. The Aedra aren't dead in a way that stops them from acting. They're dead in a way that makes their actions more meaningful. They can't micromanage, can't interfere constantly, can't force mortals to worship them or obey them. All they can do is give. Blessings, power, the gift of existence itself, and hope that mortals use those gifts wisely. When you really dig into it, The Elder Scrolls cosmology is one of the most sophisticated theological systems in any fantasy setting. It grapples with questions of free will, sacrifice, the relationship between creators and creation, the price of existence, the nature of consciousness, and it does all of this without giving easy answers. Are the Aedra good? They created the world, but they also trapped themselves and maybe trapped the spirits who didn't want to be mortal. Is Lorcan a hero or a villain? Depends on whether you value freedom or divine perfection. Is Talos a god or a pretender? Depends on what you think godhood means. The games don't tell you what to think. They give you information, let you explore, let you talk to different cultures, and trust you to form your own interpretation. That's rare in game writing. Most games spell everything out. Elder Scrolls respects players enough to leave things ambiguous. And the community has responded by creating thousands of pages of theory, debate, and interpretation. People have been arguing about Elder Scrolls lore for over 2 decades. That's the mark of something special. The Aedra being dead gods who can still grant blessings is the perfect encapsulation of what makes Elder Scrolls lore work. It's weird, it's contradictory. It requires you to think about what words like dead and alive and God even mean. And once you start thinking about it, you realize how deep it goes. You realize that every stone in every dungeon, every blade of grass in every field, every moment you spend playing the game, all of it exists because gods chose to die. And that choice reverberates through everything, from the largest cosmic events to the smallest shrine blessings. So yeah, the Aedra are dead. But death didn't stop them. It transformed them into something mortals can barely comprehend. They're in the wind, in the earth, in time itself. They're the whisper you hear when you pray at a shrine, the strength you feel when their blessing takes hold, the world that exists for you to explore. Dead gods, living world. That's the paradox at the heart of Elder Scrolls, and it's brilliant. And maybe the real question isn't, how can the Aedra grant wishes if they're dead? Maybe the real question is, what does it mean to be alive? Because if being alive means having agency, having influence, having meaning in the world, then the Aedra are more alive than most mortals. They just exist in a state beyond what mortal understanding can easily grasp. The shrines are proof, the blessings are proof. The fact that reality keeps functioning with laws and structure and predictability, that's all proof. The Aedra aren't gone, they're everywhere. You just have to know where to look. Walk into a temple. Feel the peace that settles over you. That's Mara's influence, the love she poured into creation still lingering in sacred spaces. Watch the sunrise. That's Akatosh marking another day, time continuing its march because he continues to be time. Feel the wind on your face. That's Kinnereth, still breathing even though she has no lungs anymore. The Aedra are dead. Long live the Aedra. They gave up being gods so they could be everything. And every blessing, every wish granted, every prayer answered, that's them reaching back from beyond death to touch the mortals they created. Not because they have to, not because they want worship or obedience, but because they love what they made, even in their dormant, fading, barely conscious state. That's the final answer. The Aedra grant wishes because love doesn't die when consciousness fades. The sacrifice they made was an act of love, and that love echoes through creation, powering shrines, enabling miracles, sustaining the world itself. In the end, Elder Scrolls teaches you that the most powerful magic isn't destruction or illusion or conjuration. It's sacrifice, giving up what you are to create something greater. The Aedra did it on a cosmic scale. Mortals do it every day in smaller ways, having children, building communities, creating art that outlives them. And when you pray at a shrine and feel that divine blessing settle over you, you're participating in that cycle. You're receiving the gift of gods who died, and maybe, in some small way, you're honoring their sacrifice by using that gift to do something worthwhile. The Aedra can grant wishes if they're dead, because death isn't the end in Tamriel. It's a transformation. And what the Aedra transformed into was the greatest wish of all. A world where anything is possible, including the possibility that one day mortals might become gods themselves. Maybe that's what the Aedra are really waiting for. The day when mortals evolve to the point where they can take up the burden of divinity, where they can make their own sacrifices, where they can create new worlds and new possibilities, and maybe some mortal already did. Maybe Talos is the proof that it's possible. Maybe the last Dragonborn will be next. Maybe you're reading this, playing these games, exploring this world, and you're part of a cosmic cycle that's been repeating since creation, each iteration bringing mortals one step closer to divinity. That's the beauty of Elder Scrolls. It's not just about playing games, it's about exploring questions that matter. What does it mean to be divine? What does it mean to sacrifice? What does it mean to create something that outlives you? What does it mean to receive a gift you didn't earn and can never repay? The Aedra are dead, but their questions are alive. And as long as players keep asking those questions, keep exploring the lore, keep trying to understand the cosmology, the Aedra's legacy continues. They wanted mortals to think, to question, to grow. And every person who looks at a shrine blessing and wonders how it works, who reads about creation myths and forms their own interpretation, who debates theology with other fans, that person is fulfilling the Aedra's purpose. So how can the Aedra grant wishes if they're dead? Because they're not granting wishes anymore. They granted one wish, the wish for a world of possibility, and everything else flows from that. The shrine blessings, the divine interventions, the blessings on heroes, those are all just ripples from the original miracle of creation. The Aedra were gods, then they stopped being gods to become the world. And now the world grants wishes through the mechanisms they left behind, the divine energy they scattered, the love they poured into existence before they faded. They're dead, and they're alive, and they're neither, and they're both. They're whatever they need to be for the world to keep existing. And that's the most godlike thing imaginable. Not power over reality, but the willingness to become reality, so that others can be free. The Aedra are dead. The Aedra are alive. The Aedra are the world. The Aedra are in every prayer, every blessing, every breath. They're the answer to questions mortals don't even know they're asking. And they're waiting, dormant and dreaming, for the day when mortals have evolved enough to understand what they gave up and why. Until then, the shrines keep working, the blessings keep flowing, the world keeps turning. And somewhere in Aetherius, in the realm of magic and divinity, the fading consciousness of the Aedra watches and hopes that it was all worth it. Based on everything we've seen, everything mortals have accomplished, all the beauty and horror and creativity and love that fills Tamriel, it seems like it was. The sacrifice was worth it. The death was worth it. The transformation was worth it. And maybe that's the real reason the Aedra can grant wishes even though they're dead. Because they already got their wish. They wished for mortals to exist, to thrive, to be free. And every day that wish comes true, the Aedra's power remains real, their blessings remain potent, their love remains eternal. Dead gods don't grant wishes. Living gods grant wishes. But the Aedra are neither and both, existing in a state that transcends those categories. They're the world itself granting wishes through divine mechanisms. And as long as the world exists, as long as mortals keep praying and hoping and striving, the Aedra will keep answering. Not because they're alive, not because they're dead, but because they became something greater than either. They became the possibility of miracles in a world that shouldn't have miracles. And that's the most divine thing of all. So, the next time you're wandering through Skyrim and you see a shrine, stop for a moment. Read the inscription. Think about what God it honors. Pray if you want to. Take the blessing if you need it. And remember that you're touching something ancient, something that existed before time, something that gave up everything so you could be there in that moment, making that choice. The Aedra are dead. Long live the Aedra, and long live the world they died to create. Alright, so that's the deep dive. That's everything there is to know about how the Aedra can grant wishes despite being dead. From the cosmology to the mechanics, from the theology to the philosophy, from the different cultural interpretations to the weird edge cases and obscure lore. The answer is complicated, because Elder Scrolls doesn't do simple, but that's what makes it worth exploring. The Aedra are dead but not gone, dormant but not absent, powerless but all-powerful. They exist in paradox, and that paradox is what makes them feel real. In a world full of fantasy tropes where gods are just superpowered beings, Elder Scrolls gave us gods who sacrificed themselves to create reality, and that sacrifice means something. It changes how you see the world, how you interact with shrines, how you understand the conflicts between mortals and Daedra. The Aedra can't protect you directly. They can't appear and save the day. They can't fight your battles. All they can do is give you the tools, the blessings, the world itself, and trust you to do the rest. And maybe that's what makes them worth worshipping. Not their power, but their faith in you. Dead gods granting wishes through automated shrines powered by fading divine energy in a world that exists because those gods chose to stop existing. That's Elder Scrolls lore in a nutshell. Weird, deep, tragic, beautiful, and endlessly fascinating. Thanks for going on this journey through the cosmology of Tamriel. Whether you're a lore nerd who knew all this already, or someone just discovering how deep this rabbit hole goes, I hope you got something out of it. The Aedra are dead. The Aedra are alive. The Aedra are everything, and the Aedra are nothing. All of it is true, none of it is true, and the truth is somewhere in between where mortals can barely see it. Now go forth, pray at some shrines, get some blessings, and remember that you're carrying the legacy of dead gods who loved the idea of you enough to stop being gods. That's heavy, that's beautiful, and that's why Elder Scrolls lore will keep people talking for decades to come.